On my birthday, my mom handed me a card and said, "You're lucky we even remembered you this year." My sister laughed. "Don't spend it all in one place." "Oh wait, it's empty." I smiled and said, "I just got hired at a firm that pays me more in a month than you've made all year." Then I tore up the $30,000 check I was going to give them and walked out. 32M, never thought my birthday would be the day I finally walked away from my family. But looking back now, maybe it had been building for years. The favoritism started when my sister was born. I was 7, and suddenly I wasn't the center of attention anymore. That would have been normal sibling stuff, except it never balanced out. Every achievement I had was met with lukewarm enthusiasm, while her average accomplishments were celebrated like she'd won a Nobel Prize. When I got accepted into a top engineering program with a scholarship, my parents took us all out to dinner to celebrate her making the cheerleading squad. My acceptance letter sat on the kitchen counter for 3 days before anyone even asked about it. I learned to stop expecting much. Graduated college, started working at a mid-tier tech company, moved into a modest apartment. I was doing fine, building my career quietly while my sister bounced between jobs and boyfriend drama that somehow always required my parents' financial intervention. They'd helped her with rent 6 times in 2 years. When I needed help with my security deposit after college, they told me it was time to be an adult. But I still showed up, still came to family dinners, still sent gifts on birthdays and holidays, still hoped that maybe one day they'd see me the same way they saw her. 3 months before my 32nd birthday, I interviewed with one of the biggest tech firms in the country. The position was senior software architect, and the salary was more than I'd ever imagined making. I went through 7 rounds of interviews, took their technical challenges, presented my portfolio of work. When they called to offer me the position, I actually had to sit down. The base salary alone was $240,000, not counting bonuses and stock options. I didn't tell my family right away. I wanted to wait until everything was finalized, until I'd signed the paperwork and started. My plan was to surprise them on my birthday, which fell 2 weeks after my start date. I'd even written out a check for $30,000, split between my parents and my sister. I knew they'd been struggling. Dad's small business had taken hits during the economic downturn, and Mom's part-time work wasn't bringing in much. I thought maybe this generous gift would finally show them that I'd made something of myself, that I was worth being proud of. The morning of my birthday, I woke up feeling optimistic for the first time in years. I'd been at the new job for 2 weeks and was already getting praise from my team lead. The work was challenging but fulfilling, and my colleagues actually respected my input. I felt like I was finally stepping into the person I was meant to be. I arrived at my parents' house around noon. They'd asked me to come by for lunch, which was already unusual. Normally, my birthday was acknowledged with a quick phone call and maybe a card in the mail a few days late. Walking up to the front door, I felt that old familiar hope creeping in. Maybe this year would be different. My sister's car was in the driveway. She'd driven in from the city, which meant they'd actually coordinated this. My heart lifted a bit more. Mom opened the door before I could knock. She looked tired, distracted. She barely looked at me as she told me to come in. That lunch was almost ready. Dad was in the living room watching a game, gave me a brief nod. My sister was on her phone at the kitchen table, didn't even glance up when I walked in. We ate leftover casserole in near silence. I tried making conversation, asking about Dad's business, about Mom's garden, about my sister's latest job. Short answers, disinterested responses. The check in my jacket pocket felt heavier with each passing minute. After we finished eating, I started clearing plates. Mom stopped me and said she had something for me. My sister looked up from her phone finally, a strange smirk on her face. I felt a flutter of nervousness in my stomach, though I couldn't say why. Mom handed me a birthday card. It was generic, the kind you buy in a pack of 10 at the drugstore. She told me I was lucky they even remembered me this year, her tone flat, almost annoyed. Before I could process that statement, my sister laughed and told me not to spend it all in one place, then paused dramatically and added that I couldn't anyway because it was empty. I opened the card. There was no money inside, no gift card, nothing. Just their signatures, and my sister had drawn a little smiley face next to hers. The card itself was blank inside except for a pre-printed happy birthday at the top. Something crystallized in that moment. All those years of being overlooked, dismissed, treated like an afterthought, they condensed into perfect clarity. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being oversensitive. This was real, and it had always been real. I felt incredibly calm. I looked at the three of them sitting there, my sister still smirking, my mom looking impatient like I was taking too long to react, my dad already turning his attention back to the television. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the check I'd written. I told them I'd just gotten hired at a firm that paid me more in a month than they'd made all year. My sister's smirk faltered. Mom actually looked at me for the first time that day. I held up the check so they could see the amount, told them it had been meant for them, to help with their struggles, to celebrate my success with the people who were supposed to matter most to me. Then I tore it in half, then in half again, then kept tearing until it was confetti in my hands. I let the pieces fall onto the kitchen table, scattering across the leftover casserole dishes. The silence was absolute. My sister's mouth was actually hanging open. Mom stood up so fast her chair scraped against the floor, asking me what I thought I was doing. Dad finally looked away from the TV, confusion on his face. I told them I was done. Done pretending that their bare minimum counted as love. Done accepting scraps of attention while my sister got the full meal. Done being the responsible one who showed up and helped, and tried while getting nothing in return but condescension and mockery. Mom started saying I was being dramatic, that it was just a joke, that I was overreacting. My sister found her voice and called me selfish, said I was throwing a tantrum over a stupid birthday card. Dad just looked uncomfortable, told everyone to calm down. I picked up my keys from the counter. I told them that if they wanted a relationship with me going forward, they could reach out and actually try. Actually show up. Actually act like they gave a damn whether I existed or not. But I was done carrying the weight of caring all by myself. My sister stood up then, her voice getting shrill. She said I thought I was so much better than everyone now that I had money. That I'd always been stuck up, always acted superior. Mom joined in, saying I was being cruel, that family was supposed to forgive and overlook little things, that I was breaking her heart. I asked Mom when she'd last asked me about my life. When she'd last called just to see how I was doing, not because she needed something. I asked my sister when she'd last acknowledged a single thing I'd accomplished. I asked Dad when he'd ever stood up for me, ever told them to ease up, ever made me feel like I mattered even half as much as my sister did. None of them had answers. They just stared at me with this mixture of shock and indignation, like I'd violated some fundamental rule by finally saying what had been obvious for decades. I walked out, got in my car, drove away. My phone started ringing before I'd even made it to the main road. I let it ring. The calls and texts continued for days. Mom left tearful voicemails about how I was tearing the family apart. My sister sent angry texts calling me every name she could think of, then switched to guilt-tripping messages about how I was killing Mom with stress. Dad sent a single text telling me I needed to apologize and fix this. I blocked all of them after a week. Update 1. It's been 4 months since I walked out, and I need to write this down because the whole situation has evolved in ways I never expected. The first month was hard, not because I missed them exactly, but because I kept second-guessing myself. Was I overreacting? Should I have handled it differently? The guilt was crushing some days, even though intellectually I knew I'd made the right choice. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects, stayed late, volunteered for the complex problems nobody else wanted to tackle. My team lead noticed and started giving me more responsibility. I made friends with a couple of colleagues, actually accepted invitations to grab drinks after work instead of always declining. Slowly, I started building something that felt like a real life instead of just an existence. About 6 weeks after the birthday incident, I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. It was my aunt, my mom's sister, who I'd always been closer to than my immediate family. She'd heard what happened. Of course she had. But she wanted to hear my side. I told her everything. Not just the birthday, but years of accumulated neglect and favoritism. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she told me she'd seen it too, had tried to talk to my mom about it over the years, but my mom always got defensive and shut down the conversation. She said something that stuck with me. Sometimes people build a narrative about their family and refuse to see anything that contradicts it. My parents had decided somewhere along the way that my sister needed more support, more attention, more grace. And once they decided that, every piece of evidence to the contrary just got filtered out. It helped, hearing that, knowing I wasn't crazy. Around month 3, my sister showed up at my apartment. I have no idea how she got my address. I'd moved to a nicer place after the new job started, but there she was, standing in my building lobby at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday. She looked awful. Tired, makeup smudged like she'd been crying. She asked if we could talk. I almost said no, almost told her to leave, but something made me let her come up. We sat in my living room, this uncomfortable silence stretching between us. Finally, she started talking. She'd lost her job 2 weeks ago. Her boyfriend had dumped her, and she'd asked our parents for money again. They'd told her no for the first time ever. Told her they couldn't keep supporting her lifestyle, that she needed to figure things out on her own. And apparently, in that conversation, Dad had said something about how I'd managed to build a successful career without constant bailouts. Maybe she should try doing the same. She was angry at first, telling me this. Angry that I'd poisoned them against her. Angry that my tantrum had consequences for her life. But as she kept talking, something shifted. She started crying, really crying, and admitted she didn't know how to function like an adult. She'd never had to. Every time things got hard, our parents swooped in and fixed it. She didn't know how to budget, how to deal with difficult bosses, how to handle rejection or failure. She was 30 years old and had no real skills for navigating life. I didn't feel triumphant hearing this. I mostly felt sad. Sad that our parents had done this to both of us, just in different ways. They'd neglected me, sure, but they'd also failed her by never letting her develop resilience or self-sufficiency. I asked her what she wanted from me. She said she didn't know, that she was scared, that she wanted to understand why I'd left, why I'd given up on them so easily. I told her I hadn't given up easily. I'd spent 25 years trying before I finally accepted that trying wasn't enough, that I couldn't fix their perception of me, couldn't force them to value me, couldn't keep lighting myself on fire to keep them warm. We talked for 3 hours that night. Really talked, maybe for the first time in our lives. I didn't offer her money, didn't offer to fix her problems. But I did tell her she could call me if she needed advice, if she wanted help figuring out the practical stuff of adulting. She left looking thoughtful instead of angry. She's called twice since then. Wants to ask about how to negotiate a salary for a new job interview. Wants to get advice on apartment hunting. The conversations are stilted, awkward, but they're real in a way our previous interactions never were. Update 2. 6 months out now, and my life looks completely different. I got promoted at work. My team lead left for another opportunity and recommended me as his replacement. The promotion came with another significant salary bump and a corner office that still feels surreal. I'm managing a team of 12 engineers, and we're working on a project that could legitimately change how our industry handles data security. I started therapy. My aunt had suggested it, and I'd been resistant at first, but finally decided to try it. It's been illuminating and painful in equal measure. Working through the childhood stuff, the patterns of seeking approval, the ways I'd learned to make myself small to avoid rocking the boat. I'm learning to recognize when I'm people-pleasing versus when I'm actually being kind, learning that boundaries aren't selfish, learning that my worth isn't determined by other people's recognition. The situation with my parents has evolved in an unexpected direction. They reached out through my aunt about 2 months ago, asking if I'd be willing to meet with a family therapist. All of us together, to work through things. I was shocked they'd suggested it, but my therapist encouraged me to at least consider it. We've had 3 sessions so far. They're brutal. Mom cries a lot, gets defensive. Dad mostly sits quietly, occasionally trying to play peacemaker. My sister has come to 2 of them, which surprised everyone. In the last session, the therapist asked my parents to specifically identify things they were proud of me for. Mom struggled. She eventually came up with graduating college and getting a good job, but it was generic, surface-level stuff. Nothing specific, nothing that showed she actually knew anything about my life or work or interests. Then the therapist asked them to do the same for my sister. They lit up. Detailed stories, specific memories, genuine enthusiasm. The contrast was so stark that even they seemed to notice it. The session ended early because Mom was too upset to continue. My therapist told me later that sometimes the hardest thing for parents to admit is that they failed their child. That seeing the evidence of their unequal treatment reflected back at them in such an undeniable way was forcing them to confront something they'd been avoiding for decades. I don't know if family therapy will fix anything. I'm not sure I even want things fixed in the traditional sense. But I'm learning that I can have a relationship with them, maybe, if it's on my terms. If I'm not constantly auditioning for their approval. If I can accept them as flawed people who hurt me, whether they meant to or not, and decide what level of contact I'm comfortable with from that place of acceptance rather than hope. My sister is doing better. She found a stable job, moved into a modest apartment she can actually afford. She started therapy too. We meet for coffee every couple of weeks. The conversations are still sometimes tense, but she's trying. She apologized a few months ago, really apologized, for how she'd treated me over the years. For the mocking, the entitlement, the way she'd weaponized our parents' favoritism. I asked her why she'd been so cruel about the birthday card. She admitted that she'd been jealous, hearing that I'd gotten such a good job, that she'd wanted to knock me down a peg, make me feel as small as she was feeling. It doesn't excuse it, but it explained it. The weirdest part of all this is that I'm happy. Actually happy, not just okay or fine or getting by. I'm dating someone I met through work friends, nothing serious yet, but it's nice. I bought a ridiculous gaming setup for my apartment. I'm planning a trip to Japan next spring, something I've wanted to do for years but never prioritized. I look at that torn-up check sometimes. Well, not literally. I threw those pieces away, but I think about it. About what I was trying to buy with that money. Their love, their pride, their acknowledgement. And I'm glad I tore it up, because those things can't be purchased. Either they're given freely or they're worthless. My birthday is coming up again in a few weeks. I'm throwing myself a party, invited my real friends, my colleagues, my aunt, even my sister. My parents weren't invited, though my therapist has suggested I might consider letting them know about it, giving them the option to attend if they're willing to just show up and be present without making it about their feelings. I'm still deciding on that. What I know for sure is that I'm not that person anymore, the one who would accept an empty card and a joke at his expense and swallow down the hurt. The one who would keep trying to earn something that should have been given freely. I walked out of that house 6 months ago, and I walked into a life where I matter, where my wins are celebrated, where my presence is valued, where I don't have to apologize for taking up space. Tearing up that check was the most expensive and most worthwhile thing I've ever done.